So, all right. So we're recording now.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Suber. This is part 3 of Pivot Tables. This webinar is called Establishing Relationships. So in this webinar, we're going to do, there's not much content left if you've seen the previous 2 webinars. In this portion, we're going to cover how we're going to connect tables. So our agenda today is I'm going to run through a sample scenario. Then I'll go over database relationship theory. We'll do another sample scenario. And I'll throw in some cautionary notes if you choose to use Power Pivot in the future. And at the end, we'll have questions. As for system requirements, in the past, I said you needed Excel for the enterprise version. But with the recent update, Power Pivot is now available for personal subscriptions as well. So you don't need any upgrade to your Microsoft Office subscription. So that is good news. I have my contact info below. You can, if you don't have your questions answered during the webinar, you can email me or
a webinar of pivot tables. Well,
you can either email me or you can call me by phone. So let's begin. So we'll start with sample scenario number 1. So library director Claudia wants to justify a budget increase for new laptops for the new fiscal year. Create a shared pivot table that shows cert data by fiscal year that demonstrates increase in use if the data provides, and a measure that shows costs per laptop circulation. So below, I already have the tables formed so far. So in the budget table, we have fiscal year, books and binding, e-resource subscription, publications used, other supplies, slush fund, audio-visual materials. In the second table, we have the circulation, which is date, AV, books, cardigans, cats, laptops, and ebooks. So Director Claudia asked for 2 things. She wants to see the total cert data. So we're going to add another total column in the cert data, as in total circulation. And in order to make a measure for cost per laptop circulation, we'll need to have these 2 tables connect to each other. So in order to do that, we would have to make another field from the date. So we would have to convert that date into a fiscal year. So I'm going to add another field right here. So if we can do this, we can create a measure as well. So let's jump into the Excel file and play with Power Pivot and pivot tables. So I'm going to go to circulation. So we need to create a total field. So I'm going to insert a new field. I'm going to call it total. And I'm going to move it. Oops. How do I move it? Okay. Sorry about this. There you go. Okay. So I'm going to add this is, so to make a total field, so I'm going to do equals C2, or actually sum C2 to drag this H2. There you go. Now we have a total field. Now we're going to add a fiscal year to connect with the budget field. So I'm going to add a field. Oop. And call it fiscal year. I'm going to convert all these dates into a fiscal year. Luckily, I have a formula to convert dates to fiscal year. So I'm going to plug that in. So all right. Okay, so we have our circulation table. Now we have to bring in our budget table. So to do that, we have to query because it's in a separate spreadsheet. So I'm going to go to data. You could go to get data from file, from workbook. You know, find my budget table. Go import it. You know, press load. So this is our budget data. Drag it over here. So I'm going to rename this as budget. So now we have our two tables. So to figure out the cost per laptop measure, we would have to make a pivot table. So I'm going to take this this table, and I'm going to add. Oops, sorry, the screen share thing is in my way. Okay. So I'm going to add this table to our data model. Our circulation table. So add to data model. You might have to click twice because Power Pivot is kind of laggy. So we have our circulation table. So we're going to also add our budget table. So we're going to add this to the data model as well. So we both see that our circulation table and our budget table are both in the Excel sheet, which is great. So now that everything is in the data model, see if I can drag this down. Close that out. Now that everything is in the data model, we can create a pivot table. So I'm going to go insert pivot table, and I'm going to use this workbook's data model because it both has the circulation and budget information. So I'm going to press OK. And voila, our budget is in there and our circulation is in there. So remember like before, in order to create a measure, the fields, you have to tick the field boxes so they show up. So I'm going to click fiscal year, and I'm going to click books and binding and click all these fields. And unclick them. Except for fiscal year. And I'm going to do circulation. And I'm going to do AV. Books. Cardigans. Cats. Laptops. Ebooks. In total. So, you notice the data is kind of off, right? Or the data is actually kind of off because it has the same numbers for both FY18 and FY19. So to fix that, we can't click on the budget fiscal year table, fiscal year field, but we have to click on the circulation. So, and because we have an FY00, I'm going to eliminate it from our criteria. So, okay. So now the data looks fine. So let's attempt to create a measure. Okay, so I'm going to go to Power Pivot, add measures, new measure, and I'm going to call it cost per laptop use. So I'm going to do type in sum of, we can use actually any field in the budget field for the cost for laptops. So I'm going to assume it comes from other supplies. And I'm going to divide it by the number of laptops, or sum of laptops. So I'm going to make that a number, and we'll see what happens. And we have a number. So we have a cost per laptop used for FY18 through FY20. So if we uncheck this fiscal year box, and instead we choose this fiscal year box, we get drastically different numbers. And that's one of the problems with fiscal, with measures. You have to actually create relationships to fix that. And let me show you how. So let me jump into my PowerPoint. Let's see, so relationships. So if you look at our table, let's see here. Okay, all right. So to fix this, you have to look at relationships. So database relationship theory. So there are many different types of relationships you can create between tables. And the first one is one-to-one. So for example, both tables can have only one record on either side of the relationship. Each primary key value relates to one or no record in the related table. They're like spouses. You may or may not be married, but if you are, both you and your spouse have only one spouse. So that's a one-to-one relationship. Would that apply to our tables? Maybe. Another type of relationship is one-to-many. The primary key table contains only one record that relates to none, one, or many records in the related table. This relationship is similar to the one between you and a parent. You have only one mother, but your mother may have several children. Does that apply to our tables? And another relationship is the many-to-many relationship. Each record in both tables can relate to any number of records or no records in the other table. For instance, an author can write several books, and a book can be written by several authors. Many-to-many relationships require a third table known as an associate or a linking table, because relational systems can't directly accommodate the relationship. So, knowing this information, how can we apply that to our pivot table? Well, we see that fiscal year is common between these two tables. So maybe we can create an additional fiscal year table to correct the measure of cost per laptop use. So let me uncheck this. So we see that fiscal year is, there's FY18, FY19, and FY20 data. And in the budget table, there's FY18 and FY19 data. So let's create another table. We'll call it fiscal year. And we'll create a table. It will have headers. And we'll name it fiscal year. And since FY18 and FY19 is in the data, and so it's in the data here, or FY22, we'll add that data to this table. So it'll just be FY18 as a data field, FY19, and FY20. Cool. All right, so now we have a third table. We'll call it fiscal year. I'll call the sheet fiscal year too. Okay, so we're going to go back to our data. Well, we're actually going to add this to our data model. So we're going to add fiscal year. So that's now it's part of our data model. So now we want to connect fiscal year to all three of our tables. And to do that in Excel, to establish the relationship, you can do this in one of two ways, but I'll show you the easier way. You click on Diagram View, and you see all of our tables are here. So now we're going to, since one of the relationships was one-to-many or many-to-one, there you go. We're going to create a many-to-one relationship from the fiscal year table to the budget table and circulation table. So see, it's many to one. See, this little asterisk thing means many. And we'll do the exact same thing for the circulation table. Let me delete that. I think I didn't connect it. Okay. So let's go back to our pivot table. Since we altered the data model, we have to refresh the data. And we see our fiscal year tables in the pivot table field. So we click on fiscal year. We're going to filter for FY18, no blank fields. We're going to add cost per laptop, the measure we created before. And voila, we have the cost per laptop use, which is what we wanted before. So to make it prettier, I'm just going to add this as a counting form. So it costs, like in FY18, $16.42. In FY19, it costed $23.54, and in FY20, it costs about $7. So as we look on the scenario before, she also wants to see an increase in use. So total cert data, so we'll add that field as well. So click on the table and we'll add the total field. Since this is not accounting, we can have this as a general. Yep, everything looks good. We answered the question. So that's one scenario. So if we can apply that same logic, we can do the same thing with the second scenario as well. So I'm going to close everything out. I'll leave this open just in case. And we're going to try scenario number 2. So in this scenario, to give you a little context, when I presented with my boss, Tara, I received a lot of questions of how I did this exactly, like how I created benchmarks. And if you follow along so far, you might have already figured it out. It's the exact same logic of what I showed you before. But for example purposes, we'll use one of the benchmarks I created with Tara for our project. So in this example, it says Dean Tara wants to see a benchmark of number of physical titles per student for FTE, which is full-time equivalents, and headcount for colleges within peer group 7 between fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 19. Create a shared pivot table that shows this calculation by using ACRL data. So there's a lot to unpack in this table, but if we apply the same concept we learned from the previous webinars and what we did just now, we can create a benchmark of physical titles per student, full-time equivalency, and net headcount. So let's think about tables. What tables do we need? So, so we need a fiscal year table, it sounds like. So table 1, fiscal year. Okay, and we need to divide it by number of titles. Okay. And we need another table that shows enrollment. So we also want to divide that by fiscal year. So we'll do fiscal year. There you go. Do fiscal year, full-time equivalency, head count, which is great. But we have a problem here too. We also want to divide it by the title of institution. So to add to our original table, we want to divide it by institution. And number of fiscal titles, which is great. So, and we need a third table for fiscal year. So, because that's a shared element. Oop, sorry about that. I forgot. We also want to divide institution, the fiscal year by institution as well. So we have two things that are common within all these tables. It's fiscal year and institution. So we'll create a third table called fiscal year. And we'll divide that by peer group. And we'll create another table that shows institution. Yep. From this, I think we're pretty good to go. So let's click on this. So I already pre-created the table, so we don't have to input all the data and stuff. But so I have one table with enrollment. So we have our FTE and our head count in our institution, and by fiscal year, we have the number of titles. So I had some other fields too as well. But we'll focus on like books volume count. But it's divided by institution, we see here, and by fiscal year. And we'll go to the general tab, which is the institution where we're going to combine all the fields to make a many-to-one relationship by institution, and it's divided by peer group. And we also have a fiscal year because every table, like titles and enrollment, it's divided by fiscal year. So with knowing all that, let's create a data model and connect all the relationships. So let's start adding this. So to add this table, but just by clicking on it, add to data model. So now we have our enrollment in there. And we're going to click on the titles table. I'm going to add to data model. You see that title shows up. Then we're going to go back to the general tab. And by institution, we got to add to data model. So now we have 3 tables in there. Then we're going to go to the fiscal year table and add to data model. So now we have 4 tables in our data model. Now we need to connect everything. So I'm going to go to diagram view. So I'm going to put my titles down here. Put my enrollment down here. My fiscal year here. And my college is here. So I'm going to connect my fiscal year to the fiscal year. Create a one-to-many relationship. Then I'm going to do a fiscal year, connect this fiscal year to create a one-to-many relationship. Then I'm going to connect institution because it's common among these 2 tables, enrollment and titles, and create another one-to-many relationship. And I'm connect the same thing to this field by institution to create another one-to-many relationship. So you might say, that's a lot of things going on, Sam, but we connected our common tables to the tables that we want to divide by. So that's what we want. So knowing that we have our data model complete, I can close this out and I can create a pivot table. So you can click on any table you want. So I'll just go on the first tab and I'll do insert pivot table. And I want to use this workbook's data model. So now we see all of our tables are in our data model. So again, you want our fiscal year checked. And we want you want to know or see our institutions. And we want to see our peer group. So as we can see, there's a lot going on here. So let's filter. Since Dean Terrell wants peer group 7, we'll filter by peer group 7. So and let's filter by year as well. We don't want to see all fiscal years. We want to see 17 through 20 or 19. So cool. But I still don't like how it looks. So that looks better. So because she wants, what does Tara want? She wants number of titles per student and head count. Okay, so we have to create a measure. So to create a measure, we have to tick the fields that we want first. So I'm going to click on FTE. I'm going to unclick it and click on head count. I'm going to unclick it. Then I'm going to go to the titles table and click on books title count, which is what we want. So knowing that, we can create a measure So we'll go to measures under Power Pivot. Go to measures, new measure. We're going to call it number of titles per student FTE. So we'll do sum of, you see all the things we checked before in those tables, they show up again in the measure field. So it'll be sum of book titles count divided by sum of FTE. And we'll call this, we'll use a number. And let's see. Ta-da! All right, I'm gonna adjust this a little bit. No, it's good. All right. So, okay, so we have number of titles per student FTE. So we can do the same thing for headcount. So do new measure. So let's do the same kind of language. Number of titles per student headcount. So sum of books divided by sum of headcount. And we want a number. Hooray! So we answered Tara's question using Power Pivot and establishing relationships between all these tables, which is what we wanted. So that's basically the gist of what Power Pivot can do. It connects all the tables that you want, but just be mindful of that you have to create other tables to connect those tables. Knowing that, I just want to give you some cautionary notes if you use Power Pivot in the future. If you do query your data, Excel takes a long time to load and refresh data. In my experience, it's recommended to have tables in one spreadsheet to eliminate this. If you query your data, make sure you remember its location. If you move it, you have to change the location of your query in your spreadsheet and refresh the data, like in webinar number 2. And yes, any data that your data model in Power Pivot accepts queried data. In my experience, Power Pivot is very choppy. You may notice Power Pivot ribbon disappears from time to time, either from the measure you created or the amount of data in the data model. It's recommended you restart your computer when this happens, or make sure Power Pivot is selected in the settings. Power Pivot is database light. It enables users to create relationships as needed between tables in Excel, but it's not as scalable as real database software like SQL, Access, Oracle, QuickBase, Amazon. Depending on how much data your library has, actual database software may be a better solution. It may be more beneficial instead to use Excel pivot tables as a visualization method instead of storage. One of the reasons why Moraine Valley used Excel and pivot tables was that it was very accessible to our staff. Staff had experience with Excel, with standard data entry. So looking at Excel again, had concepts very, very familiar to them. And so it made them familiar with pivot tables a lot easier. That's basically it. thanks for listening and thanks for attending. And I'll stick around if you guys have any questions.
Hi, Sam. I'm through with my other meeting that I had to run to. I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it without seeing my data. We, at the library, we needed to track athletes checking in and out. So we created a form where they would put their name, their ID number, their sport, and when they hit submit, it would register their time, and all of that went into a spreadsheet. Then I did a pivot table to compare the in and out times, and then it would say, okay, they were here an hour and a half. The problem we had is if the student came in the morning, checked in and out, and then he came back later in the afternoon, checked in and out, the pivot table would then give me every iteration. Like if he came in at 9 and left at 1, it would give me 9 to 1. And if he came in at noon, it would say he came in at 9 and left at noon. So it would give me 4 different answers when he was only there twice. And we couldn't figure out a way to say, no, just take the in and outs from the specific times. I don't know if that's something that could be done with a pivot table, or you could answer it without seeing my data.
It sounds like it's more like how your data is actually inputted into the form. I think you need to split some of the in and out information without looking at the data in front of me. So the pivot table can recognize if it's only in twice as opposed to 4 times. Without looking at the data specifically.
Yeah, what it was doing is it was taking the in and comparing it to both outs, and then taking the new in and comparing it to both outs.
Yeah, I think that's formatting with the original Excel table that you have. So that's you would have to format the data in a way so the pivot table recognizes the different iterations of those in and outs.
Right.
So I wish I can give you more specific answers, but I have to look at the data. So.
Yeah, what we wound up doing is because it would give you a negative number or a really large number, we just deleted those.
Oh.
Because I know you weren't there for 14 hours, dude.
Yep, outliers are often deleted. So.
Yeah. But good job, Sam. Good job.
Hope you guys learned something new.
Are there any other questions? Cool. If not, we will get this processed and posted, and then you can share it for those people who weren't there, and they can watch all 3 at one time. Other than that, I thank you guys so much for logging on. Lois, you can stop the recording.